Yep. Okay. We're ready to bring you our rendition of A Christmas Carol on the Candlelight Stories. I don't actually have a campfire, but I have some candles going here. By way of introduction, I will tell you this is the story of many spirit ghosts who arrive to visit a man and speak to him about how he has been living his life. I want you to know that the story might seem scary at times, so I do want caretakers to decide if this story is right for their people. The story is called A Christmas Carol, and now we can begin our story with tonight's reading of Stave 1, Portion 1. Here we go. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadliest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, and his sole mourner. And I'll give you a vocabulary word here now. To you, you hear the word soul, but to me I can see it on the page, and there are two different ways to spell that. One is S-O-U-L, which means a person's spirit, and one is S-O-L-E, which means just one, the only one. So, when I say Scrooge was his sole friend and sole mourner, I will tell you the author has spelled it S-O-L-E, the only one. And even Scrooge, the author goes on to say, was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from, says the author. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. My side note is that the story has a happy ending, so you should know about that. Okay, back to the story. If we were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, there would be nothing more remarkable in his taking a stroll at night in an easterly wind upon his own ramparts than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. And some of you will know that, this is my side note, some of you will know that the author is referring to a famous play called Hamlet, where Hamlet does see and hear from his father's ghost. So, if you didn't know that, now you know. Okay, back to the reading. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood years afterwards above the warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, the thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows, and his wiry chin. He carried his own long temperature always with him. He iced his office in the dog days, that means summertime, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he, no falling snow more intent upon its purpose, no pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind man's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? Was the very thing he liked. to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing one called nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by and was brewing on a large scale. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep an eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. And so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. I think the author is saying in a polite way what Scrooge probably didn't say in a polite way. I bet he didn't say, "My dear fellow, it's necessary for us to part." I bet he said, "Get out of here," or something like that. But let's reread that sentence. So surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter. I'm told this means a scarf. Let's read that sentence again. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. And this is where we'll end our story for tonight, because it's a very sassy sentence. Do you think the problem was that the clerk just couldn't imagine the candle was warm enough to warm him on a cold day? Or do you think the author's being sassy? Probably not the imagination that's a problem, right? It's probably the fact that it's really cold out and he doesn't have enough coal. Okay. So, what do we know so far? There's a guy named Scrooge. He has a clerk. It's cold out. It's foggy, and foggy cold is a very cold cold, I'll tell you that much. And we also know the author is a little bit sassy. Okay. Good job listening, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.